Shelley Fabares, the television fixture for decades, has died at the age of 82. Her first big break came when she was cast as Mary Stone on the Donna Show.
On August 22, 2026, Shelley Fabares died in Los Angeles at 82. And the man who loved her for more than 4 decades is now the one confirming what her final months were actually like. Mike Farrell married Shelley in 1984, stayed beside her through a liver transplant, and has spent this past week telling the world the quiet truth behind the woman millions grew up watching on the Donna Show and Coach. So what really happened in her last days, and why is Farrell speaking now instead of staying silent? Stick around, because the real story is far gentler than the headlines suggest. The night everything changed. Shelley Fabares died on a Saturday evening in Los Angeles, surrounded by the people who loved her most. And within hours, the tributes describing her passing had reached almost every major outlet covering entertainment. Her family released a statement confirming that she had passed peacefully, calling her a source of love, strength, laughter, and comfort to everyone who knew her. And that statement ran in full within a day of her death. No official cause of death was released by the family, and multiple outlets noted that detail directly rather than speculating further. What is known is that Fabares had spent years managing serious health complications tied to an autoimmune condition, the same illness that led to her liver transplant back in October 2000. Reporting has connected her final decline to complications arising from that long-running condition, though the exact medical circumstances of her passing were never made public in full, and her family made clear they wanted that privacy respected during their grief. Her husband, Mike Farrell, issued the family statement himself, a detail that struck many longtime fans given how private the couple had always kept their home life over the years. Colleagues who worked alongside her decades earlier began posting their own memories almost immediately once the news broke. Glenn Scarpelli, her former co-star on One Day at a Time, wrote that he had spoken with Fabares just months earlier and that their final conversation ended, fittingly, with the words "I love you" exchanged between 2 old friends who had stayed close since childhood. The timing of her death carried its own weight for anyone who had followed her career closely over the decades. Just 4 months earlier, in April 2026, Farrell had appeared on a podcast discussing the couple's decades together with a warmth that now reads very differently in hindsight. Nobody listening at the time could have known that conversation would become one of the last extended public reflections he gave before losing her for good. Grief moved through the entertainment industry quickly, with tributes appearing across social media, from actors who had shared scenes with her going back to the 1950s, some of whom had not spoken publicly about her in years. Fans who grew up watching her as a teenager on network television, then again as a supporting player in the 1970s, and once more as a sitcom wife in the late 1980s, all found their own entry point into mourning her. The scale of the response reflected something important about her career, a 6-decade run that touched multiple generations of television and film audiences across very different eras of American entertainment history. Craig T. Nelson, her longtime Coach co-star, was among the many voices remembering her publicly that week, describing 9 seasons spent working alongside her as some of the most enjoyable years of his own career. Other former colleagues, including performers she had shared scenes with as far back as the 1950s, added their own recollections in the days that followed, painting a picture of someone who had remained warm and grounded even after 6 decades in front of cameras. But to really understand why her death hit so many people so hard, you have to go back and look at exactly who Shelley Fabares was before any of the tributes started pouring in. Because her story did not begin on a soundstage in the 2020s. It began as a child performer in post-war Los Angeles, and that beginning explains almost everything that came after in her long and unusually varied career. Before the cameras, who Shelley Fabares really was. Shelley Fabares was born Michelle Anne-Marie Fabares on January 19, 1944, in Santa Monica, California, the niece of singer and actress Nanette Fabre, whose own show business career had already opened doors that Shelley would eventually walk through herself as a young child. She started modeling at age 3, moved into dancing lessons soon after, and by the time she was 10 years old, she had already made her television debut on an episode of Letter to Loretta in 1954, followed by early appearances on programs like Captain Midnight and a recurring spot on Annie Oakley. At age 12, she made her professional film debut playing Rock Hudson's daughter in the 1956 drama Never Say Goodbye, and that same year she appeared in the psychological thriller The Bad Seed, small early credits that hinted at a work ethic far beyond her years. Her breakout role arrived in 1958 when she was cast as Mary Stone, the teenage daughter on The Donna Reed Show, a part she held until 1963, and one that made her a household name among American teenagers watching network television. She later reflected that the years she spent on that series, roughly ages 14 through 19, shaped her more than almost anything else in her professional life, and she frequently credited Donna Reed herself as a mentor who modeled the kind of on-set professionalism she carried for the rest of her career. Music became an unexpected second act almost overnight. In 1962, while still filming the sitcom, she recorded Johnny Angel and the single shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and eventually sold more than 1 million copies, giving her a brief but genuine run as a recording artist alongside her acting work. Hollywood soon paired her with one of the biggest names in the business. Fabares starred opposite Elvis Presley in 3 films released during the height of his movie career, beginning with Girl Happy in 1965, followed by Spine Out in 1966 and Clambake in 1967, all light-hearted musical comedies typical of Presley's output during that stretch of his career. Between those roles, she also appeared in the 1964 surf drama Ride the Wild Surf and the 1966 musical Hold On, opposite Peter Noone of Herman's Hermits, keeping her firmly inside the youth-focused film world of that era. Decades later, she looked back on the Presley films fondly, saying in a 2024 interview that doing 3 pictures with him had been wonderful fun, even though everyone involved knew the films themselves were not exactly serious cinema. She continued working steadily through the 1970s, taking a more dramatic turn with her role in the acclaimed 1971 television film Brian's Song, which earned her a Golden Globe nomination before joining One Day at a Time as Francine Webster from 1978 to 1984, a role that let her play against the wholesome image built during her teenage years. Her most enduring later role came in 1989, when she was cast as Christine Armstrong opposite Craig T. Nelson on the ABC sitcom Coach, a role that a retrospective published after her death called one of the most memorable performances of her entire career. The show ran for 9 seasons and earned her 2 Primetime Emmy nominations for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, a fitting capstone to a career built on versatility rather than a single defining role from her youth. Away from acting, Fabares rarely courted attention for its own sake, giving relatively few interviews compared to peers of her stature and preferring to let the work itself speak for her career. When she did speak with reporters, including a 1993 conversation with the Los Angeles Times, she tended to focus on gratitude toward the people who shaped her, rather than dwelling on her own fame or the milestones she had already achieved by that point in her life. Understanding that full arc, child performer, chart-topping singer, Elvis Presley's leading lady, Emmy-nominated character actress, makes it much easier to understand the man who chose to spend more than 40 years standing quietly beside her, and why his account of her final days now carries so much weight. The man who never left her side. Inside Mike Farrell's devotion. Mike Farrell was born Michael Joseph Farrell Jr. on February 6, 1939, in South St. Paul, Minnesota, and moved to the Los Angeles area with his family when he was only 2 years old, growing up alongside future stars like Natalie Wood and Ricky Nelson at his local grammar school. He attended Hollywood High School, served 2 years in the United States Marine Corps, and later studied acting under teacher Jeff Corey while working odd jobs, including a stint as a private investigator, before his career finally took hold in the mid-1960s. His breakthrough came in 1975 when he joined the cast of MASH as Captain B.J. Honeycutt, a role he held until the series ended in 1983, and one that earned him 2 Primetime Emmy nominations of his own for both acting and writing. After the show wrapped, Farrell stayed active on screen, producing the 1998 Robin Williams film Patch Adams, starring in the drama series Providence from 1999 to 2002, and later appearing in smaller roles on Desperate Housewives, Law and Order Special Victims Unit, and even a 2012 episode of Supernatural. Off-screen, Farrell built an entirely separate reputation as one of Hollywood's most committed political activists, serving as president of Death Penalty Focus, working for years with Human Rights Watch, and even assisting with emergency surgery on a guerrilla leader while volunteering with refugees in El Salvador during the 1980s, an episode he later detailed himself in his own autobiography. He later served as first vice president of the Screen Actors Guild's Los Angeles branch and received a humanitarian award from PETA, among other honors recognizing his work outside acting entirely. Farrell and Fabares first crossed paths in 1970, when she guest-starred on his short-lived series The Interns, though nothing romantic developed between them at the time, since both were still married to other people. They reconnected more than a decade later at a CBS affiliates convention, and this time, the connection stuck for good. The couple married on December 31, 1984, at the Pacific Palisades home of Fabares' Aunt Nanette Fabre, a detail that resurfaced in coverage of their more than 4-decade-long marriage published shortly after her death. Blending their families was not effortless. Farrell has said openly that his divorce from his first wife was hard on his 2 children, Michael and Aaron, and that the early years of his marriage to Fabares required real patience as the kids adjusted to 2 separate households they were now splitting time between. Fabares reportedly gave the children space rather than forcing a relationship, a choice that Farrell later credited with helping the family settle into something stable and lasting over time. That steadiness became especially visible once Fabares' health problems emerged. When she needed a liver transplant in 2000 after nearly 2 years on a waiting list, Farrell stayed by her side through the surgery and the recovery that followed, a period she described years later as one that changed her completely and left her permanently grateful for his presence every step of the way. He also supported her advocacy work for Alzheimer's research, a cause she took up after her own mother's death from the disease in 1992. Just months before Fabares died, Farrell sat down for a podcast conversation on Still Here Hollywood, where he described how their relationship began with something as small as a shared cup of coffee after bumping into each other at Universal Studios, a story that Rolling Stone's obituary coverage recounted in full once her death was announced. That interview now reads as one of his final public reflections on their marriage before he found himself writing the statement announcing her death, only months later. Friends of the couple have described Farrell over the years as someone who rarely separated his marriage from his broader sense of purpose, treating his devotion to Shelley and his commitment to humanitarian causes as two parts of the same personality rather than competing priorities. That consistency is part of why his recent public statements have carried so much credibility with longtime fans of the couple, since nothing about his tone after her death differs from how he spoke about her for decades beforehand. With that history in place, the real question becomes what Farrell has actually said since losing her, and what his own words reveal about the final chapter of Shelley Fabares' life, together with him. The truth, Mike Farrell has finally revealed about her final days. In the days following her death, Farrell did not retreat from public view the way some grieving spouses choose to. Instead, he personally confirmed the family statement that ran across nearly every major outlet, describing Shelley as a devoted wife, cherished stepmother, daughter, sister, aunt, and friend, whose warmth made a lasting difference in the lives of everyone who knew her throughout her long career. That same statement, later expanded on in coverage from Deadline and other entertainment outlets, made clear that Fabares died surrounded by loved ones rather than alone or unexpectedly, a detail that mattered enormously to fans who had followed her for decades and worried about how her final chapter might have unfolded. Reports describing her final period consistently mentioned that she had been managing a brief illness in the immediate lead-up to her death, language that Variety used in its own reporting on the days surrounding her passing that week. What Farrell's recent comments reveal, more than any single medical detail, is the emotional truth behind those final months of her life. He has consistently framed her decline not as a tragedy defined by suffering, but as the closing chapter of a full life spent surrounded by family, describing the atmosphere around her in her last days as calm rather than frightening for anyone present. That framing lines up with reporting from Closer Weekly, which noted that no dramatic medical emergency was disclosed publicly, only the continuation of health issues she had lived with for years before her passing. Farrell has also used this moment to highlight her decades of quiet advocacy rather than dwelling purely on loss and grief. Her work supporting Alzheimer's research following her mother's death, combined with her openness about her own liver transplant, meant that Fabares had already spent years being unusually candid about serious illness long before her own final chapter arrived. That candor, Farrell has suggested in his recent comments, shaped how their family approached her last days, with honesty rather than secrecy guiding the way they spoke about her condition to friends and extended family. Coverage following her death, including a detailed look back at her career published by Daily Voice, noted that Fabares died following what her family described only as a brief illness, without further elaboration on the specific medical timeline that preceded her passing. That restraint, rather than frustrating fans, seemed to match exactly how the couple had always handled difficult chapters of their life together, privately and on their own terms, rather than through public statements to the press. Perhaps the most striking part of what Farrell has revealed is how ordinary the final stretch actually sounds once you strip away the tabloid framing surrounding celebrity deaths. There was no scandal, no estrangement, no hidden crisis kept from the public eye. There was simply a couple married for more than 40 years. A woman who had already beaten devastating health odds once before with a life-saving transplant, and a husband who stayed exactly where he had always been, right beside her, until the very end of her life. Fans who spent the past week searching for a dramatic twist to the story were left instead with something quieter and, in its own way, more meaningful. A reminder that most real lives end the way this one did, surrounded by the people who mattered most, rather than by mystery. For a couple who spent 42 years avoiding tabloid attention whenever they could, that quiet ending feels less like an absence of information and more like a final act of the same privacy they protected throughout their entire marriage. That is ultimately the truth Mike Farrell has revealed about Shelley Fabares' final days. Not a scandal, not a secret, but 4 decades of quiet devotion carried all the way to the last moment they shared. Her legacy now rests in the same place it always did. In Mary Stone's warmth on The Donna Reed Show, in Johnny Angel still playing on classic radio stations decades later, in 3 Elvis Presley films that captured a lighter era of Hollywood filmmaking, and in 9 seasons of Coach that reminded audiences she could handle comedy and depth in equal measure. Shelley Fabares spent nearly 6 decades in front of cameras and 42 years building a private life with one man who never stopped choosing her every single day. Her death closes that chapter, but the details Mike Farrell has shared since losing her make clear that her final days were defined by exactly the same thing her entire life was built on: love that stayed steady no matter what came next for either of them. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.